When you obsess over an avoidant, you believe you are holding on to love, but in truth, you are holding on to fear. Fear of loss, fear of abandonment, fear that without them you are somehow incomplete. And the moment you place another human being at the center of your inner universe, you step away from the divine truth that you are already whole. Energy, like water, flows toward where attention goes. When you pour your energy into chasing, explaining, proving, and waiting, you unknowingly elevate the avoidant while shrinking yourself. This imbalance cannot survive forever. The universe does not allow distortion to remain uncorrected. At first, the avoidant feels powerful. Your obsession feeds their ego. Your messages, your patience, your forgiveness become proof that they can withdraw and still be desired. This is the first stage, comfort without responsibility. They breathe easier because they do not have to show up fully. But comfort without connection is not peace. It is numbness disguised as freedom. What they mistake for strength is actually avoidance of intimacy, and what they call independence is often unexamined fear. Then something subtle begins to happen. As you continue to give and they continue to retreat, your soul grows tired, not angry, tired. And when you finally redirect your focus inward, when you stop chasing and start remembering who you are, silence enters their world. This silence is not punishment, it is truth, and truth is uncomfortable for those who have lived behind walls. This is the second stage, confusion. They notice the absence before they understand its meaning. They tell themselves stories. You moved on too fast, you never really cared, because ego must protect itself before awareness arrives. In the third stage, the noise fades, and reflection begins. Without your energy sustaining the connection, they are left alone with themselves. Avoidants fear this space, because it reveals what distraction once hid. They begin to remember your presence not as pressure, but as warmth, not as neediness, but as devotion. This is when regret quietly knocks, not loudly, not dramatically, but persistently. Regret is born when appreciation arrives too late. Then comes comparison. This is the fourth stage. They meet others, but something feels missing. Conversations lack depth. Touch lacks meaning. They realize that what they avoided was not you. It was intimacy, responsibility, and the sacred vulnerability of being truly seen. And now, without you, the world feels oddly hollow. Divine law is at work here. What is not valued in presence becomes priceless in absence. In the fifth stage, ego cracks. They replay moments, words, chances they dismissed. They recognize how your consistency was not weakness but strength, how your patience was not desperation but love. This realization hurts because it exposes their own emotional unavailability. And pain, when it teaches, is mercy in disguise. The sixth stage is longing, not just for you, but for who they were when they felt loved without armor. They may reach out or they may stay silent, but inwardly they are changed. The obsession they once inspired has transformed into self-confrontation. They begin to understand that avoidance costs more than vulnerability ever could. Finally, the seventh stage arrives, acceptance. They see the divine symmetry of it all. They were not abandoned, they were given a lesson. And you were not rejected, you were redirected. This is where wisdom is born. Whether or not paths cross again becomes secondary. What matters is that balance is restored. And here is the greatest truth. The moment you stop obsessing, you return to yourself. You align with purpose instead of attachment. You remember that love is not meant to be chased. It is meant to be shared by two whole beings standing in their truth. When you choose self-respect over obsession, the universe rearranges everything accordingly. So do not fear letting go. What is truly meant for you will not require you to abandon yourself. And what leaves your life makes room for something deeper, truer, and divinely aligned. When you become obsessed with someone who tends to avoid emotional closeness, you unknowingly shift the focus of your energy and attention away from yourself, and place it entirely on that other person. This creates a subtle but powerful imbalance in your inner world. Energy, like a current, flows in the direction where your thoughts, emotions, and focus concentrate. When you fixate on another person, especially someone who instinctively distances themselves from intimacy, you begin to give them more power over your emotional state than they ever intended or even realized. This dynamic is rarely conscious at first. You tell yourself you are doing it out of love, care, or hope for connection, but the deeper undercurrent is often fear, fear of being alone, fear of rejection, or fear that your worth depends on their acceptance. In placing another person at the center of your emotional universe, you displace the vital foundation of your own self-worth and well-being. This imbalance causes a gradual diminishment of your own sense of identity. When your thoughts constantly orbit around someone who keeps pulling away, your own needs, desires, and boundaries begin to fade into the background. You start to live in anticipation of their responses, measuring your actions by how they will be received, and second-guessing your own feelings to align with what might make them stay or come closer. This kind of emotional surrender leaves you vulnerable, not because you are weak, but because you have handed your power over to another's avoidance. You invest hours analyzing their behavior, hoping to decode signals that are often inconsistent or contradictory, and your mind becomes a tangled web of what-ifs and if-onlys. Yet, despite your best efforts, the avoidant person typically feels the weight of this obsession as a pressure or a threat. Their natural instinct is to protect themselves from being overwhelmed or engulfed, so they pull back even more. This creates a push-and-pull pattern, where your obsession drives their withdrawal and their withdrawal fuels your obsession. It is a cycle that feeds on itself, deepening the imbalance in your emotional ecosystem. The energy imbalance you create by obsessing over an avoidant cannot last indefinitely, because life operates on principles of natural equilibrium. Just as water finds its level and the seasons change in their time, emotional energy seeks balance. When you pour your attention and emotional resources into chasing someone who is emotionally unavailable or resistant to closeness, you neglect the relationship that matters most, the one you have with yourself. Over time, this neglect leads to a depletion of your inner reserves. Your self-esteem erodes, your confidence diminishes, and your ability to set healthy boundaries weakens. In effect, you sacrifice your own emotional health on the altar of an elusive connection. This process often brings a painful but necessary awakening. When the imbalance becomes too great, you begin to notice signs that your obsession is not serving your well-being. You might feel exhaustion, confusion, frustration, or deep sadness that no amount of chasing can resolve. This discomfort is a signal from within, a call to redirect your energy back toward yourself. The moment you start to reclaim your focus, choosing your own healing, growth, and joy over the need to fix or win over someone else, you begin to restore balance. This redirection is a profound act of self-love and spiritual alignment. It reminds you that your worth is inherent, not dependent on the acceptance or attention of others. Furthermore, by stepping back and centering yourself, you allow the natural law of balance to unfold. The avoidant, no longer fueled by your obsession, experiences the space and absence that awakens reflection within them. They begin to face what was once uncomfortable or denied. Meanwhile, you reclaim your power, rediscover your passions, and rebuild your life on a foundation of self-respect. This process is not just psychological, it is a spiritual realignment with the truth that you are complete and whole as you are. In essence, obsessing over an avoidant creates an energetic distortion, an out-of-sync vibration that can only be healed by turning your attention inward. When you do so, the imbalance naturally corrects itself. You no longer feed the cycle of chase and retreat, but instead cultivate inner peace and strength. This is the pathway to true freedom, where love is not a desperate pursuit, but a mutual dance between two whole beings. The power lies in remembering that your energy is precious and deserves to flow where it is honored and reciprocated. At the beginning of any connection with someone who tends to avoid emotional closeness, there is often a subtle sense of relief experienced by that person when they find themselves being pursued or chased. This relief is not born out of a desire to be caught or tied down, but rather from the comfort of not having to initiate vulnerability themselves. When someone who is avoidant senses that another person is willing to carry the emotional weight, to make the FFO, RT, to open the door for connection, it creates a temporary sanctuary. In this stage, they feel a kind of ease because the responsibility for emotional engagement has been shifted away from them. They don't have to confront their fears or anxieties about intimacy. Instead, they can relax behind their protective walls, knowing that the other person is providing the bridge. This feeling of relief, however, is delicate and fleeting. It is like a quiet breath taken after holding tension for too long, but it is not a deep, lasting peace. What often happens next is a gradual transformation of that initial relief into something more complex and unsettling: emptiness. The avoidant begins to realize that while the chase provided temporary comfort, it did not fill the deeper emotional void inside. The space they hoped to keep free remains empty, and the comfort they felt starts to dissolve into a gnawing sense of something missing. This is not a sudden awakening, but a slow unfolding, like the dawn breaking after a long night. They recognize that the distance they have maintained, the walls they have built, were not just defenses, but barriers to a fuller experience of connection and belonging. The emotional numbness they relied on to feel safe now becomes a source of isolation. As time goes on, this emptiness can grow heavier. The avoidant may begin to feel restless, disconnected not only from the person who chased them but also from themselves. The very act of pushing others away in order to protect themselves ironically causes a deeper internal fracture. The relief they once felt fades because the emotional energy they receive from the other person, though abundant in presence, lacks the depth and intimacy their soul craves. This stage is often marked by a paradox. The avoidant longs for closeness but is terrified of the vulnerability it demands. They feel caught between two conflicting needs: to protect themselves from pain and to experience authentic connection. It is important to understand that this process is not simply a manipulation or a calculated response. It arises from a complex interplay of past experiences, fears, and survival mechanisms. The avoidance journey from relief to emptiness is often unconscious, a protective dance choreographed by the mind to keep pain at bay. But underneath it all, there is an undeniable yearning for wholeness. This yearning is the beginning of transformation, even if it is not yet fully recognized or embraced. During this time, the avoidant may also experience moments of confusion and self-questioning. They may wonder why the connection that once felt easy or safe now seems distant or hollow. The relief they once took for granted gives way to a dawning awareness that emotional avoidance comes at a cost. These questions can be uncomfortable and frightening because they challenge the very patterns that have kept the avoidant feeling safe. Yet this discomfort is necessary. It serves as a signal that growth is on the horizon. The journey from relief to emptiness is often followed by a stage where reflection begins to take root. In the absence of the other person's obsession and constant attention, the avoidant is faced with the quiet space of their own emotions. This solitude can be intimidating, but it also holds the potential for insight and healing. It is here that the avoidant may start to acknowledge the depth of what has been lost. Not just the relationship, but the opportunity for genuine intimacy and vulnerability. This transformation underscores a profound truth. Emotional avoidance can never ultimately satisfy the human need for connection. Relief that comes from others taking responsibility for the relationship is temporary and surface level. True peace arises only when one embraces the urge to be fully present, open, and vulnerable. The avoidance journey from relief to emptiness is an invitation to step beyond fear and to discover the richness that comes with authentic connection. It is a painful but necessary passage toward greater self-awareness and emotional maturity. In this unfolding process, the avoidant is not the only one affected. The person who obsessively pursues them also plays a critical role in this dynamic. Their presence and energy illuminate the avoidance patterns, often stirring feelings that have long been buried. This interplay, though challenging, holds the seeds of transformation for both parties, if only they can recognize the deeper lessons hidden within the discomfort. When silence enters the dynamic between someone who obsessively pursues and the avoidant who withdraws, a profound shift begins to take place. This silence is not merely the absence of words or communication, it becomes a powerful presence, an empty space that invites reflection, confrontation, and ultimately, transformation. For the avoidant, who is accustomed to steering clear of emotional intensity, this silence can feel like a mirror held up to their inner world. It exposes truths that distraction and avoidance have long concealed. The avoidant often relies on external noise, whether in the form of constant communication, emotional detachment, or physical distance, to keep difficult feelings at bay. Silence, by contrast, strips away these layers and creates a pause in the usual flow of emotional dynamics. In this stillness, they are no longer able to deflect or escape the deeper parts of themselves. This absence becomes a space where what was previously denied or suppressed begins to emerge. It is in this quiet, unguarded moment that the avoidant confronts the reality of what they have been running from, not just the other person's pursuit, but their own ears, vulnerabilities, and unmet needs. This reflection sparked by silence often triggers an internal reckoning. The avoidant begins to notice what is missing in their life, not just the presence of the other person, but the connection, warmth, and intimacy they once resisted. The silence acts like a vacuum, pulling out the stories they told themselves to justify distance and emotional detachment. These stories, once comforting, now seem hollow. They realize that absence is not just physical, it is emotional and spiritual as well. In this process, the avoidant may experience confusion and discomfort. Without the constant input from the other person's obsession, their usual coping mechanisms feel inadequate. They are left with questions they had previously avoided. What did I truly feel when they were near? What have I been protecting myself from? What does vulnerability actually mean for me? This stage of reflection is not easy. It challenges their sense of control and safety, but it is essential for growth. It is here that regret can begin to take root, not as a harsh judgment, but as a quiet recognition of missed opportunities and overlooked affection. The silence also allows the avoidant to see the consequences of their avoidance more clearly. When someone is no longer present in their life in the same way, the avoidant can no longer dismiss their absence or take their presence for granted. This emptiness, when felt deeply, can be a catalyst for change. It reveals that emotional distance, while protective in the short term, ultimately leads to isolation and loss. The reflection brought about by silence is a turning point. It invites the avoidant to reconsider their patterns and to acknowledge the pain they may have caused, both to themselves and to the person they kept at arm's length. Moreover, silence is not just a passive void but a space filled with potential. It is an invitation to reconnect with oneself, and to listen to the inner voice that often gets drowned out by external distractions and compulsions. For the avoidant, this means developing a new kind of relationship with their own emotions, one that involves acceptance rather than denial. This internal dialogue that silence fosters can gradually dismantle the walls of avoidance and open the door to healing. At a deeper level, this process reflects universal principles of balance and truth. Just as light cannot exist without darkness, growth cannot happen without moments of stillness and confrontation. The silence between the obsessive pursuer and the avoidant is a sacred pause that allows hidden realities to surface. It is the space where illusions fall away and the raw, unvarnished truth of human connection begins to shine through. This reflective silence also carries a lesson about attachment and detachment. The avoidant learns that detaching from others in fear is not true freedom. It is a form of captivity to past wounds and insecurities. True freedom comes from the willingness to face discomfort, to embrace vulnerability, and to open one's heart despite the risks. The silence, therefore, is both a challenge and a gift. It challenges the avoidant to move beyond old patterns and offers the gift of insight and eventual transformation. In the end, silence serves as a mirror reflecting both the avoidant's fears and their potential for growth. It holds a sacred space where regret begins to awaken, not as a source of despair, but as the first step toward deeper understanding and change. This stage in the journey is crucial because it signals that healing is possible, and that true connection is always within reach when one is willing to face the truth quietly, held in the absence of noise. As the avoidant begins to move through the quiet space created by absence and reflection, regret starts to unfold in distinct stages, each one peeling back layers of understanding and emotional awakening. This process is gradual and often unconscious at first, but it is deeply transformative. The journey through regret reveals a growing awareness of what was taken for granted and what was lost, not just externally but within themselves. Each stage uncovers new dimensions of insight, moving from surface feelings to profound self-realization. Initially, regret appears as a vague discomfort, an uneasy sense that something is missing. It is not yet clear what exactly has been lost or why the absence stings so deeply. This early stage is marked by denial or minimization. The avoidant may try to explain away the emptiness by convincing themselves that the relationship was not that important or that their withdrawal was justified. These rationalizations serve as a protective shield, guarding against the vulnerability that regret demands. However, beneath this intellectual defense lies a growing emotional truth that cannot be ignored indefinitely. As this vague discomfort deepens, the avoidant moves into a stage where specific memories and feelings surface. They begin to recall moments of genuine connection, warmth, and care that were overshadowed by their own fear of closeness. This stage brings a sharper contrast between what was experienced and what was rejected or avoided. These memories may come with a bittersweet flavor, sweet because they remind the avoidant of the possibility of love and connection, bitter because they were not fully embraced when given. It is here that the avoidant starts to recognize their own role in the dissolution of the relationship and the emotional distance they maintained. With further reflection, the regret intensifies into a clearer recognition of loss. The avoidant feels the weight of what they missed, not only the sense of the other person, but the growth, healing, and intimacy that could have been cultivated. This is often accompanied by a painful acknowledgement of how their avoidance harmed both themselves and the other person. They might feel remorse for the moments when their withdrawal caused confusion or hurt. This stage is deeply humbling, as it forces the avoidant to confront the consequences of their fear and resistance to vulnerability. As regret deepens, it also brings a sense of longing, not just for the person who is now absent, but for the connection that was possible. This longing is a sign that the avoidant's heart is beginning to open in ways it had previously resisted. It reflects a growing desire to experience intimacy and emotional closeness, even though it remains frightening. This stage is critical because it marks a shift from avoidance to a willingness to engage with the pain of loss and the hope for something more meaningful. In this unfolding process, the avoidant may also wrestle with feelings of guilt and shame. These emotions arise from the recognition that their avoidance was not just a defense, but also a barrier to authentic connection. Guilt may stem from the hurt caused to the other person, while shame arises from a sense of inadequacy or unworthiness. Though these feelings are difficult, they are necessary catalysts for growth. They urge the avoidant to move beyond self-justification and to embrace accountability for their emotional patterns. The final stages of regret involve a form of acceptance and a readiness for transformation. The avoidant begins to understand that their avoidance, while protective in the past, no longer serves them. They recognize the importance of vulnerability as a path to deeper connection and personal freedom. This stage may not always lead to reconciliation with the other person, but it opens the door to healing within themselves. They begin to cultivate compassion for themselves and for others, and to explore new ways of relating that honor both their need for safety and their desire for intimacy. Throughout these stages, regret acts as a teacher, revealing the deeper wisdom hidden within loss and separation. It is not simply about sadness or remorse, it is about awakening to the truths that avoidance obscured. Each stage of regret brings the avoidant closer to the possibility of wholeness, where fear no longer dictates behavior and connection is embraced with courage and openness. This gradual unfolding also reflects a universal principle that emotional growth often comes through loss and longing. The avoidance journey through regret is part of a larger process of awakening to the value of presence, vulnerability, and authentic relationship. It reminds us that what is neglected with fear and resistance will eventually be remembered with longing and insight. Regret, when fully felt and understood, becomes a doorway to transformation rather than a prison of pain. In essence, the stages of regret are a roadmap back to the heart, a path that, though difficult, leads to deeper self-awareness, healing, and the possibility of genuine connection in the future. There is a profound and universal law at work when it comes to relationships and emotional dynamics, the law of balance and consequence. When someone is neglected, ignored, or avoided out of fear or ego, the natural order of life ensures that what is dismissed will later be remembered, often with a weighty sense of regret and longing. This principle is deeply rooted in the fabric of existence and reflects the divine intelligence that governs human connection. It teaches us that emotional neglect, especially when driven by avoidance, does not simply disappear. It leaves a mark, a space waiting to be acknowledged and healed. An avoidant person consistently distances themselves from intimacy. What they are often doing is protecting themselves from vulnerability, from pain, and from the possibility of loss. Yet in this act of self-preservation, they inadvertently close the door to the very experiences that bring meaning and growth. Over time, the avoidance creates a vacuum where connection should be, a vacuum that cannot be filled by distractions, excuses, or temporary relief. This absence does not go unnoticed by the soul. It is a silence that echoes louder with each passing day, reminding them of what was left unclaimed. Divine balance operates like a cosmic scale, where every action has an equal and opposite reaction. When emotional needs are neglected or when one hides behind walls of avoidance, the universe responds by creating conditions that bring those unmet needs back into awareness. This may manifest as a deep inner longing, a restless dissatisfaction, or a series of external experiences that reflect the internal imbalance. It is as if the soul is saying, "You cannot run from this forever. It must be faced and integrated." This balancing act is neither punishment nor reward, but a natural realignment toward wholeness. For the avoidant, this principle of balance means that the emotional distance they have maintained is not sustainable without consequence. The more they try to protect themselves by withdrawing, the more the space left behind grows, and the more inevitable it becomes that they will feel the impact of that emptiness. This feeling often arrives in the form of regret, not just regret over losing a particular person, but regret over the lost opportunity to grow, to connect, and to experience love fully. It is a recognition that avoidance may have kept pain at bay temporarily, but it also blocked the path to deeper fulfillment. This dynamic highlights a key spiritual truth. Love and connection are sacred gifts that require courage and presence. Avoidance may offer a false sense of safety, but it ultimately deprives the heart of its natural expression. When one fails to honor these gifts in the present moment, they are often forced to confront their significance later, sometimes in the form of profound loneliness or yearning. This later remembrance is a divine invitation to awaken, to see clearly what was once obscured by fear, and to embrace the vulnerability that true connection demands. The principle of balance also reminds us that healing and reconciliation are possible, but they require honesty and humility. When regret surfaces, it is an opportunity for the avoidant to examine their patterns without judgment and to begin the process of transformation. This involves acknowledging the pain caused by avoidance, not only to others, but also to oneself. It calls for a willingness to step out of the protective shell and to engage with life more openly and authentically. Furthermore, this divine law extends beyond individual relationships. It is part of a larger cycle of cause and effect that governs all aspects of human experience. Just as nature restores itself after imbalance, so too do our emotional lives seek restoration after neglect. This restoration may come through renewed relationships, personal growth, or new connections that reflect greater awareness. The key is that the energy that was once lost or avoided must be reclaimed and integrated for true healing to occur. In practical terms, this means that those who have been avoidant are often faced with moments of reckoning where they must confront the consequences of their distance. These moments can be challenging, filled with sorrow or regret, but they are also fertile ground for awakening and change. The divine principle at work ensures that what was once ignored will eventually be brought into the light, offering a chance to make amends, learn lessons, and move forward with greater clarity. Ultimately, this principle teaches a vital lesson about the nature of love and human connection. It cannot be separated from presence, attention, and care. When these elements are missing, the relationship becomes imbalanced, and life's natural rhythms demand correction. The avoidance journey through regret and longing is a reflection of this divine justice, a reminder that emotional avoidance, no matter how deeply ingrained, is never permanent. There is always an invitation to return to wholeness, to embrace vulnerability, and to participate fully in the sacred dance of connection. This law of balance serves as both a warning and a beacon of hope. It warns against the cost of neglecting emotional needs and the perils of avoidance. At the same time, it offers hope by affirming that growth, healing, and reconciliation are always within reach. The soul's remembrance of what was once avoided is not meant to imprison, but to guide us back to ourselves and to the fullness of love that awaits when we choose to open our hearts. Thank you for your time and trust. Wishing you strength and clarity on your journey ahead. Goodbye for now. May your path be filled with growth and meaningful connection. In the end, the journey of obsession over someone who avoids closeness is not just a story about two people. It is a profound lesson about the power of balance, self-awareness, and the divine flow of love. When we pour our energy into chasing what resists us, we lose sight of our own wholeness. Yet, through that very struggle, both hearts are invited into a deeper truth, that love is not possession, but freedom, not fear, but courage, not avoidance, but presence. The stages of regret remind us that what we neglect with ego will be returned to us with longing, and that true healing begins when we reclaim our own energy, honor our worth, and embrace vulnerability as a sacred strength. This is where transformation lives, where wounds become wisdom and separation becomes the gateway to genuine connection. Thank you for listening with an open heart and mind. May you move forward with grace, courage, and the clarity to love fully, starting with yourself.